The summit this year is the first on U.S. soil in 13 years. It's also the first to be held outside of Washington, D.C., and I think that's significant enough in itself. Now, while this summit won't be about the big ideas as we saw in Lisbon in 2010, this isn't going to be about a strategic concept. This summit is important in that it's about implementation. At a time where NATO is still involved in Afghanistan and has just wrapped up operations in Libya, this is about seeing the alliance through and making sure the alliance can meet the needs of a 21st century collective security arrangement. Now, where I also think the summit is going to be important in that it's going to be a restatement of the alliance's solidarity. The Euro-Atlantic partnership remains solid, and that Article 5, collective self-defense, an attack against one is an attack against all, that will remain the cornerstone of the alliance even as it moves into the 21st century. For this year's summit, we're going to see three major areas of emphasis: partnerships, capabilities, and operations. Now, in terms of partnerships, NATO is going to be discussing the network that it has created outside of the traditional NATO boundaries. For example, we had Arab nations under NATO command and control in Libya, a first for the alliance. We have 22 non-NATO ISAF nations in Afghanistan providing almost 4,000 troops. And what NATO is going to seek to do is how to leverage these partnerships in the future to enhance NATO's collective security and to also help with regional security troubles around the globe. In terms of capabilities, what NATO is focused on is this concept of smart defense. And what's meant by that are approaches that allow NATO nations to pool and share resources so unnecessary redundancies can be eliminated and perhaps costs can be brought down, which is extremely important in a time of severe budget austerity. Now, the third area to be discussed at the summit, and probably that which will garner the most media attention, is Afghanistan. Now, in Afghanistan, there's been a lot of good news over the last few years. We've seen a move into the transition phase, and now we've seen President Karzai announcing a third tranche of provinces. This brings 75% of the Afghan population under the lead of Afghan forces who are providing for their security. We have also seen the U.S. and other bilateral partnership agreements, and we are seeing the beginnings of commitments financially and in terms of resources to Afghanistan in the post-2014 period. What I think the summit is going to bring in terms of Afghanistan is clarity about what NATO's role will be in the post-2014 period. But of course, there are some very difficult decisions that are being deferred until the Tokyo Donors Conference, which will be held in July of this year. And those are decisions about the financial commitments which the United States and its NATO allies will make to the Afghans for this post-2014 period. The other reason this summit is going to be important is that it's possible that this is Secretary General Rasmussen's last summit, or at least the last summit of his first term as NATO Secretary General. What Secretary General Rasmussen has been able to do during his tenure is bring out the alliance's new strategic concept, and now he is seeking to help implement it with such mechanisms as the Smart Defense Initiative. The other thing that Secretary General Rasmussen has had to do is remind Europe that even in times of budget austerity, they must maintain their share of the burden within NATO. If the Europeans cannot continue to contribute financially to NATO, then they will lose their influence within the alliance. And the Secretary General has warned European nations on several occasions, as notably former Defense Secretary Robert Gates did in his last appearances before the alliance. Well, finally, I think when we think about what Secretary General Rasmussen has done, we must remember that he's done this not only during a time of tremendous budgetary constraints, but operational complexity. Challenges in Afghanistan and Libya that the alliance has not faced, certainly not at the same time in its history. And finally, he's also been able to come up again with these big ideas and then figure out a process for implementing them. And I think that that's a tremendous legacy for him to have as Secretary General.